Full story. Stolen childhood, reclaimed life, my fight to heal and grow. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's full story, we explore a powerful journey of abandonment, resilience, and self-discovery. Follow along as we dive into the emotional story of a person who faced challenges that shaped their life in ways they never expected. If you're touched by this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Silent Wars for more inspiring content. It was a bright, unusually warm summer day when I was just 10 years old. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden glow over everything. The kind of day that made you want to roll down the windows and let the breeze carry you away. But instead, I was sitting in the backseat of the car, staring out the window as my parents acted strangely cheerful. They weren't like this, at least not with me. Usually, it was the kind of quiet tension that had become familiar over the years. My mom, the type who never showed much emotion except irritation, and my dad, who didn't say much at all unless it was to make some half-hearted joke. But today, they were different. They were almost too happy, too over the top. They were talking louder than usual, laughing at jokes that didn't even seem funny, and playing the radio with the volume cranked up high. It was as if they were trying to make up for something, or distract themselves from something. Mom kept telling Dad to turn the music down, but then she would do it herself. Like she had to control everything. It wasn't like them. I didn't know why, but I could sense something wasn't quite right. I wasn't stupid. I'd heard their arguments, seen the silences between them, the way they'd avoid eye contact and barely talk after dinner. Something was off, but I didn't know what. I was just a kid. So, I brushed it off, figuring it was just another weird mood or phase they were going through. They always seemed to go through these cycles. We were heading to Grandma's house, a place I loved, yet dreaded. I loved her company. She always made the best cookies and let me watch cartoons in her old living room, where the TV was always too loud. But it felt comforting in its own way. But I also hated it. It wasn't home. It was always just a pit stop for me, a place where my parents dropped me off when they had their errands to run. When we finally pulled up to Grandma's house, it was as if the world outside suddenly felt bigger, more distant. The house was quiet. Grandma's old Buick was parked out front, but the front porch was empty. The old wooden rocking chair where she usually sat to watch the neighborhood felt empty, almost abandoned. "Go ahead, kiddo," Dad said, with a weirdly forced smile. "We'll be right in. We have a few things to do, but we won't be long." It sounded like a line straight out of a script, something rehearsed but not convincing. I nodded and grabbed my backpack, still not thinking much of it. I was excited to see Grandma and settle into the familiar routine of watching her do crossword puzzles while I played on my tablet. But as I walked up the steps to Grandma's front door, something nagged at me. Something was off. I pushed the door open and Grandma was standing there, just as warm and welcoming as always, though I could see in her eyes she was a bit caught off guard. "Oh, hey, sweetheart. Didn't know you'd be here today." Her voice was soft, like it always was, but I could sense her confusion too. My parents didn't come in. They didn't follow me inside like they always had before. Dad was still in the car, fiddling with something. Mom was talking to him from the driver's side window, her voice raised as though she was in the middle of an argument. I didn't understand it at the time, but there was a tense energy in the air that made my stomach turn. I remember standing there, feeling like I was in the middle of a scene I wasn't supposed to be part of. Grandma patted me on the back and led me inside. She didn't ask any questions, just set me up with a snack and sat down with her crossword, like everything was normal. I kept looking out the window, wondering when they would come back. They said it would only take a few minutes, but as the hours passed, I started to wonder. I tried texting my mom's phone, but it rang and rang without an answer. I called my dad's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when the panic began to set in, although I didn't know it at the time. I kept telling myself it was nothing. They had to be coming back. They were just running a little late. It's what kids do, right? They make up stories to explain the things they don't understand. I wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. But Grandma's silence spoke louder than words. She didn't even seem concerned when I asked again and again, "When are they coming back, Grandma?" She smiled weakly, patted my hand, and said, "Soon, dear. Any day now. They're just sorting some things out." Her words felt hollow, like they were meant to reassure me, but I could see the unease in her eyes. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't even seem to believe it herself. That was when I started to feel the weight of it. It was the first time in my life I had a feeling I couldn't shake. My parents weren't coming back. Not anytime soon. The next day, I woke up, still waiting. I saw no sign of them. There was no call, no text, nothing. I spent the entire day in Grandma's living room, sitting by the window, hoping to see their car pull up, hoping to see them walk up the driveway with smiles and apologies. But they never did. And that was the beginning of it, all the beginning of the long, painful realization that my parents had abandoned me, and nothing would ever be the same. The first few hours felt like any other day. Grandma was busy in her own quiet way, working on her crossword puzzles as she always did. The soft scratching of her pencil across the paper was a comforting sound, but it couldn't drown out the growing anxiety in my chest. I sat in the old armchair by the window, staring out at the long, winding driveway that led to Grandma's house, willing myself to see the familiar shape of my parents' car rounding the corner. I waited, watching the leaves rustle in the breeze, and hoped that any moment they'd pull up, like they always had before. But they didn't. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn, the knot in my stomach tightened. I kept checking my phone, almost afraid to look at it, knowing it would only remind me of what I already knew. No messages, no calls, nothing. My fingers hovered over my phone, ready to text my mom again, but each time I stopped myself, unsure of what I was even hoping for. The silence was deafening. "Grandma," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could hear the waver in it. "When are they coming back?" She didn't even look up from her crossword. "Soon, dear. Any day now. They're just taking care of things." Her voice was warm, comforting in its familiarity, but something in the way she said it didn't sit right. It wasn't convincing, not like before when she could smile and make everything feel okay. This time, her voice faltered, just a little. But I was too young to ask more questions, too scared to push for an answer I knew would hurt. I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. "Okay, Grandma." That night, the first night, I slept in Grandma's guest room. I don't think I even slept, though. The room was small, just an old bed with a lumpy mattress, and the walls were lined with stacks of old books and knickknacks she'd collected over the years. There was a strange smell of dust and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. It was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the house, but I wasn't used to it. It didn't feel like home. The bed was too small for me, and the blankets were too thin. I kept tossing and turning, feeling the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. Why hadn't they come back? Were they coming back at all? My mind raced, and I couldn't quiet it. I kept telling myself that they were just running late, that something had come up. But deep down, I knew better. My parents wouldn't just leave me behind. They wouldn't abandon me like this. Or would they? The next day came, and there was still no sign of them. I felt the hours drag on, each one heavier than the last. I tried to push it from my mind, tried to pretend everything was fine. But when I looked out the window again and saw no car, no familiar faces walking up the driveway, I realized something that I wasn't ready to face. My parents weren't coming back. Not today. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. Weeks went by, and life at Grandma's continued in its slow, predictable rhythm. Grandma never mentioned my parents again, as if she were pretending they didn't exist. But I couldn't. Every time I saw a car in the driveway, my heart would leap, only to sink again when I saw it wasn't them. I tried texting my mom's phone, trying to reach her the only way I knew how. But all I got was silence. My dad's phone rang and rang, and after a while, I stopped calling altogether. It became clear that no one was going to pick up. No one was going to call me back. Then, school started. It felt like the first real step away from the life I had known. Grandma took me to school on the first day. She walked me to the door and gave me a kiss on the cheek, as if everything was normal. But the truth was that nothing felt normal anymore. I used Grandma's address for everything: school forms, after-school activities, even lunch. I remember she bought me a lunchbox with puppies on it. It was cute, but I couldn't help but feel embarrassed. I was a 10-year-old with a lunchbox that was more suited for a toddler, but I said nothing. It felt too weird to speak up about anything. At school, the questions started. The kids were curious, asking where my parents were, why I was staying with my grandmother. I told them what I thought was the truth. My parents were busy. It was a half-truth at best. I didn't know what else to say. I couldn't tell them that my parents had disappeared without a trace. It didn't seem real, so I just went along with it. One day, a girl named Sydney asked me where I lived now. With my grandma, I said, shrugging like it was no big deal. For now. She didn't ask anything else, just nodded like it was normal, and I guess it was for her. But for me, it felt anything but normal. I tried texting my mom again, hoping to get some kind of response, but there was nothing. My dad's phone was still unreachable. I started to realize I wasn't just waiting for a day or two anymore. I was waiting for something that would never come. The weeks turned into months. I went through the motions, but it was clear that the life I had known was slipping away, piece by piece. Grandma tried her best, I guess. She wasn't a bad person, but she didn't know what to do with a kid who wasn't hers. She cooked the same meals over and over, none of them quite right. But I ate them anyway. She would smile at me and give me candy sometimes when I was upset, but it wasn't enough. She wasn't my mom. She wasn't who I needed. I tried not to think about it, tried not to feel the loneliness that weighed on me every single day. But it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. No matter how many toys or games I had, how many times I tried to distract myself, the truth was impossible to ignore. My parents were gone, and I had no idea why. I went to bed every night wondering where they were, wondering why they hadn't come back for me. But by the end of the first month, the questions stopped. I couldn't keep asking. I couldn't keep hoping for something that wasn't going to happen. It hurt too much. So I stopped. I stopped waiting. I stopped expecting them to come. I started living a new life, one where my parents were nothing more than an occasional memory, a faint shadow of something that used to be. And so, life went on. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The absence of my parents became a quiet, ever-present weight in my life. I couldn't escape it. At first, there were letters, sent from time to time, written in my mom's familiar handwriting. The letters were always short, and to the point, never long enough to explain anything, but just enough to remind me that they hadn't completely forgotten about me. My mom would write, "We're sorting things out. We'll be back soon." Every time, I'd hold on to those words like they were a lifeline, but I knew deep down that soon never came. There was always the promise of a return, a future where everything would go back to the way it was. But as the days wore on, I started to see the hollow nature of those letters. They were written out of obligation, not love. The playful scribbles of my dad in the margins, his stupid jokes and sarcastic comments felt empty, like the last remnants of a relationship that had already died. And I kept waiting. Waiting for them to show up. Waiting for them to make it all right. But the more I waited, the more I realized how much that silence hurt. It wasn't like the dramatic moment of abandonment that you see in movies. No big confrontation, no yelling or fighting, no storming out. It wasn't that clear-cut. It was the slow realization, the creeping feeling that they weren't coming back. Not for me. And that realization wasn't sudden. It was a quiet understanding that grew louder the longer I was left in that space between them and me. At first, my friends didn't seem to notice, or maybe they just didn't ask. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, even they started to sense that something wasn't right. The questions became more frequent. "Where's your mom and dad?" they'd ask, their voices full of concern that I couldn't answer. I just shrugged, offering the same half-explanation I'd been repeating for months. "They're busy with work. They'll be back soon." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. My teachers asked too, their concerned glances following me as I entered class each day. I could see it in their eyes, the pity, the questions they didn't ask. And Grandma was different. She was always there, but she wasn't really there. She didn't ask many questions, didn't seem to want to know what I was feeling. She did her best, but it was clear she was just going through the motions. She didn't know how to comfort me, how to fill the silence that my parents had left behind. It was like everyone around me knew something was wrong, but no one dared to say it out loud. So, we all lived in the silence of abandonment, each of us pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. One night, I overheard Grandma talking on the phone with my mom. I was supposed to be asleep, but I couldn't help myself. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing, when I heard her low voice. I didn't mean to listen, but the conversation drew me in. The words were muffled, but I caught the tail end of what Grandma said. "She's asking about you." Her voice was soft, almost tired. Then I heard my mom's voice faintly, too soft for me to make out. Grandma sighed, and then I heard her words clearly. "I know, but she's your child." It was that moment, the moment I overheard those words, that everything shifted for me. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a huge revelation. It was just a simple, quiet statement that made everything fall into place. Grandma didn't have the answers, and Mom didn't care enough to give me any. It wasn't that she didn't want to be a parent. It was that she was so lost in her own world that she couldn't see how deeply her absence was affecting me. In that moment, I understood something that I wasn't ready to understand. My parents weren't coming back. They weren't coming for me. They weren't going to apologize or make it right. And the worst part was, they didn't even seem to care. The realization hit me like a cold wave, and I felt myself go numb. It wasn't a dramatic, life-shattering moment of anger or tears. It wasn't even a relief. It was just this heavy, suffocating silence that wrapped itself around me. And as much as I wanted to run to Grandma and ask her what it all meant, I couldn't. I didn't have the energy to ask, because I knew she didn't have the answer either. I lay there in the dark that night, listening to the faint hum of the house, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, and the distant sounds of Grandma moving about in the kitchen. I realized then that the loneliness wasn't just physical. It wasn't about the empty rooms or the empty promises. It was about the emotional void I was left to fill on my own. It was about feeling like I had been abandoned not just physically, but emotionally, and that no one was coming back to fill that space. The silence stretched on. There were no more letters from my parents, no more calls. I stopped waiting for the soon that they had promised, because soon was never coming. I stopped checking my phone for missed calls. I stopped wondering if today would be the day they finally returned. The silence was louder than any words could be. Days turned into months, and I began to realize that I was alone, not just in the sense of being physically separated from my parents, but alone in the way that mattered most. Alone in my pain, alone in my longing for something that would never come. And the worst part was, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad either. I was just numb. I'd been waiting for so long for something that never materialized, and in that waiting, I had changed. I had learned to survive in the silence, but surviving wasn't living. In that silence, I began to see things differently. I started to understand that my parents' absence wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And in their absence, I learned that I had to be the one to fill the silence. No one else was going to do it for me. And so, I learned to live in the silence not as a victim, but as someone who had been forced to grow up far too quickly. I learned to fill the spaces with my own voice, my own thoughts, and my own story. And while I wasn't ready to forgive them, I was learning to forgive myself for waiting so long for something that was never going to come. Years went by, and the absence of my parents became something I learned to live with, though it never stopped hurting. The weight of it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like a shadow that followed me everywhere. Every day felt like a reminder of how much was missing, of what I should have had but didn't. At first, I tried to fill that empty space with distractions games on my tablet, endless hours of TV shows, and mindless scrolling through social media, hoping that something, anything, would make me feel less alone. But none of it worked. The void remained. No amount of virtual worlds or meaningless noise could replace the real, human connection I needed. Grandma did her best, and in many ways I was thankful for her. She kept a roof over my head, fed me when I was hungry, and tried to make me feel safe. But there was always a distance, something I couldn't quite explain. She was kind, but she was also a stranger in her own way. She had her own life, her own friends, her own routine, and I was just a small part of it. Her world didn't revolve around me, and I knew that deep down. I wasn't her child. I was just someone she was taking care of for a while. She never asked about how I was really doing, never checked in on my feelings, and though I knew she cared, there was no emotional connection to fill the void left by my parents. She was doing what she had to do, but it wasn't enough. And I didn't blame her for that. She wasn't the one who should have been raising me. She was too old to be a mother, too set in her ways. I was a constant reminder of everything I'd lost, and I could see it in the way she sometimes looked at me, as if wondering how she had ended up with me and why. I was just part of the background noise in her life, someone who existed in her space but didn't truly belong there. I didn't have a family. Not in the way people are supposed to have a family. There was no warmth, no unconditional love. There was just me, alone in a world that never seemed to care much about my needs. At school, the weight of all this isolation started to show. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. The other kids were busy with their families, picking up their kids after practice, taking them on family trips, showing up for parent-teacher conferences. I wasn't part of that world. I didn't have a parent to sit with me at school events, no one to help me with my homework, no one to celebrate my achievements. And the more I tried to fit in, the more I realized I couldn't. I couldn't explain to anyone why I didn't have a mom or dad picking me up from school, why I didn't have birthday parties or family vacations. It was easier to just make up stories. When people asked about my parents, I lied. It was simpler that way. I told them my parents were away for work, or going through some things, which was technically true, but not the whole truth. I didn't want to tell them the real story that my parents had abandoned me, and I hadn't seen them in years. The truth was too painful, too complicated. So I lied, and I told myself it wasn't a big deal. But deep down, I knew the lie was eating away at me. Every time I told it, I felt more and more detached from the reality of my life. The more I lied, the more I believed my own story, and the more disconnected I became from who I really was. But lying didn't fix things. It only made them worse. At school, I started acting out. I stopped caring about my assignments, stopped showing up to class with the work done. I didn't participate in group projects or raise my hand in class. What was the point? No one was watching me. No one was making sure I was okay. So why should I care? I was just drifting through, hoping no one would notice that I was falling apart on the inside. One day, a counselor pulled me aside. I knew her. She was the one who gave us pep talks about being positive and trying our best. She was nice enough, but I never really trusted her. I didn't want to talk about my problems with someone who wouldn't understand. She sat me down in a small room and asked if everything was okay at home. She was trying to be kind, but her question felt like an accusation. I just shrugged, not sure what else to say. "Yeah," I muttered. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. It wasn't just the absence of my parents that hurt, it was the complete lack of acknowledgement from anyone. It was the way everyone around me acted like nothing was wrong, like I was just a normal kid with normal problems. But I wasn't normal. I wasn't like everyone else. My life was broken in a way I couldn't explain, and no one cared enough to ask. The counselor looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for a sign that something was wrong, but I gave her nothing. What was I supposed to say? What could I say? I didn't even know how to explain it to myself. I didn't know why my parents had left, why they never came back, why no one had stepped in to help me. All I knew was that I had learned to be alone, to depend on no one but myself. I walked out of the office that day with the same feeling I always had: empty. The counselor probably thought I was fine, just another kid who didn't want to open up. But the truth was, I didn't want to open up because I didn't have anything left to give. I had given everything to the idea that one day my parents would come back, that everything would be okay again. But that wasn't happening, and I had to face it. I was alone. And that was something I was going to have to learn to live with. The emotional strain of those years is something I'll never be able to fully explain. It wasn't just the absence of my parents. It was the quiet ache of not having anyone there who truly saw me, who truly cared. I wasn't just abandoned physically, I was abandoned emotionally. And that's something that sticks with you long after the people who left are gone. The years passed, and with each one, the absence of my parents became a part of me, something I learned to live with, even if I didn't want to. It had been so long since they left, and I had come to believe that they had erased me from their lives. I never expected them to come back. And yet, there they were standing in front of me at my grandmother's funeral. It was surreal. I stood there, frozen, my mind unable to process what was happening. After all the years of silence, the neglect, and the pain of being left behind, they had the nerve to show up. My mother walked toward me first, her smile too wide, too forced. I could see it in her eyes. She was trying so hard to act like everything was normal, as if years of abandonment were suddenly going to disappear in one moment. Behind her, my father stood awkwardly, holding a bouquet of flowers like a prop, unsure of what to do with his hands. They tried to act like nothing had happened, like we were just meeting after a long vacation. But I knew better. I had seen their faces in every letter they had sent, every text message that went unanswered. Their smiles, the ones they wore like masks, didn't fool me. Not anymore. After all the years of waiting, of hoping, I realized that I had already let them go. I didn't need them to come back. I didn't need them to pretend to care. We went to a dull corporate chain restaurant afterward, the kind with laminated menus and sticky tables. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through. My parents kept trying to make small talk, like we were just two strangers catching up. It was painful to watch them stumble through their words, as if they expected me to just pick up where we left off. I couldn't bring myself to participate. "Wow, you've really grown up," my mom said, her voice dripping with false warmth, as if she had the right to say that after all these years of silence. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Why are we here?" I asked bluntly. There was no point in dancing around the truth anymore. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. Not anymore. My mom hesitated, the smile faltering on her face. "We want to be a family again," she said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. Like all the years of abandonment could be erased in an instant. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. It was cold, sharp, and it felt good. "You're about a decade too late for that," I shot back, my voice colder than I intended. The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. My father, who had been quiet up until then, finally spoke. His voice was weak, defensive. "We were just doing the best we could," he muttered, like that would somehow make up for everything. "It was hard for us. We didn't know what to do." I felt a flare of anger rise within me, sharp and hot. "So, you thought abandoning your child was doing your best?" I asked, my words dripping with disbelief and rage. The waitress hovering by the table shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension, but neither of them said anything. They just sat there, silent and frozen. They didn't have a response to that, because there was no good answer. The silence between us stretched out longer than I could bear. In that moment, I saw them clearly for the first time. Not as my parents, but as people who had let their own guilt and selfishness define their choices. They were not victims. They weren't people who had struggled with hardship and were simply doing the best they could. They were selfish. They had made choices, and they had abandoned me. They had chosen their own comfort over my well-being, and now they were sitting here, pretending to want a relationship, pretending to be sorry. The waitress shifted again, unsure whether to intervene or just let us be. But I didn't care. I didn't need their apologies or their excuses. I didn't need them to make it better. I had learned to live without them, and I had learned that I didn't need them to be happy. I had a life of my own now, a life where I wasn't defined by their absence. My dad, looking uncomfortable, tried to continue. "We never meant for things to turn out like this," he said, his voice lowering, as if trying to make me feel guilty for being angry. "You have to understand, we were just trying to keep it together. It wasn't easy for us." I could feel the walls of anger inside me starting to close in. My throat tightened, and I leaned forward, my voice steady but full of pain. "Grandma raised me alone," I said, "and you just stopped being parents. You gave up on me when I needed you the most." I wasn't sure if I was saying it for them or for me, but I said it anyway. I needed them to hear it, to understand just how much their absence had hurt me. My dad went quiet. The words stung, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, regret, maybe even sorrow. But it didn't matter. It wasn't enough anymore. I didn't need their remorse. I needed them to act like parents when I was a child, not show up years later when it was convenient for them. And then, in a move that caught me completely off guard, my mom reached out, putting her hand on mine. She looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes, as if she could fix everything in that one moment. "Can't we just start over?" she asked, her voice filled with desperation. I pulled my hand away slowly, my heart hardening. "You didn't want me when I was a kid. Why would you want me now?" My voice was quiet but firm, and I saw her flinch as if I had slapped her. Maybe it was harsh, but I didn't care. You didn't want me then. And now, when everything's too late, you want me to pretend everything is fine? I said, barely above a whisper. But it was a question that didn't need an answer. It was over. It had been over for years. My dad stood up, the anger boiling in his eyes now. You'll regret this, he spat, his voice trembling with frustration. But I didn't feel a flicker of guilt. Maybe, I said, my voice steady, but not as much as you should. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor, and without a word, I walked away. The conversation spiraled further downhill from there. My mother's words grew more strained, her excuses more pathetic. She tried to shift the blame to her stress, to the guilt she carried from all these years, but I wasn't having it anymore. Her attempts to justify her actions, her abandonment, fell flat against the cold wall I had built up over the years. It was as if she had no understanding of how her absence had shaped me, of how her decision to leave had carved a void that nothing, no apology, no excuse could ever fill. She tried to play the victim, the poor, overwhelmed mother who never meant for things to turn out the way they did. But the more she spoke, the more I saw through her words. I saw the manipulation in her voice, the guilt that wasn't for me, but for herself. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry that things hadn't gone the way she wanted them to. She was sorry because, after all these years, she finally realized how empty her life had become without me. But it wasn't real. It was just another excuse. I had heard these same excuses for years, in the letters, in the half-hearted phone calls, in the fleeting moments of contact they'd occasionally send. They were always about them, about their struggles, their guilt, their sadness. It had never been about me, never about how I had to grow up without the love and care of my parents, without the stability that other kids took for granted. The truth was so simple. They didn't want me back because they loved me. They wanted me back because they were lonely, because they couldn't face the consequences of their own choices. And it hit me. It had never been about me. It was always about their need for redemption, their need to feel less guilty about leaving me behind. They weren't looking to repair the damage they had done. They were looking to repair themselves. They wanted me to forgive them, not because they had earned it, but because it would make them feel better, make them feel like they had fixed something. But I wasn't something to be fixed. I was a person, a child who had been left to pick up the pieces on her own, who had learned to survive in the wreckage they had left behind. The guilt I had carried for years, the guilt that I had somehow caused their absence, started to lift from my chest. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. I had held on to that guilt, wondering if I had done something wrong, if there was something I could have done differently to bring them back. But now, I saw it for what it truly was: manipulation. They had left me, and that was their choice, not mine. I couldn't listen to her anymore. I couldn't sit at that table, pretending like this was just a normal conversation, like we could somehow fix everything in one moment, in one conversation. This wasn't a movie. There wasn't going to be a happy ending, not for me, and not for them. I stood up, the chair scraping across the floor, and without a word, I walked out. My heart pounded in my chest, my legs shaking with the force of the decision. But as I walked away, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. I was done. I had done enough waiting, enough pretending that everything could be fixed with a few words. I wasn't going to play along with their story anymore. I could hear my mom calling after me, her voice pleading, desperate. "Please, can't we start over?" she asked, her words barely above a whisper, as if she truly believed I could just forgive everything and pretend that nothing had happened. I didn't even turn around. "You didn't want me when I was a child?" I said, my voice cold and steady. Why would you want me now? I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to hear it. The words were empty. The explanations were hollow. I was done. The years of waiting, of hoping for something that would never come, had broken me. And now, as I walked away from them, I realized that it wasn't just about their absence anymore. It was about me finally realizing that I had the power to walk away from this, to stop waiting for their love that would never come. The guilt, the manipulations, the never-ending excuses, they were too much. I had carried their baggage for far too long, and it was time to let it go. I had tried for years to make sense of what had happened, to find some way to forgive them for the years they had stolen from me, but it wasn't my job to fix them. It wasn't my responsibility to make their actions make sense. I was a grown woman now, and I realized I didn't need them. I had survived without them. I had learned to build a life for myself, even if it was one without parents. As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting off me. The years of pretending, of trying to fill the gaps with lies and excuses, had taken their toll. But now I was free. I was free from the burden of their absence, free from the idea that I had to forgive them, free from the guilt they had placed on me for things that were never my fault. I didn't need them to tell me I was good enough. I didn't need them to tell me that they were sorry, because in the end, I had learned to be good enough on my own. I didn't need them to fix anything. I had already fixed myself. And that was the final break. The moment I stopped waiting for them, stopped hoping they would come back, and finally realized that I didn't need them to be whole. I was enough on my own. Ever since that moment when I finally walked away from the table and left my parents behind, I've been living in silence. It's not the kind of silence that's comforting or peaceful. It's a silence born of abandonment. A silence that has settled deep inside me, filling the spaces they left behind. But it's my silence now, and I've learned to live with it. My parents still try to reach out. Every few months, without fail, I get a text message, a voicemail, or sometimes even a letter from them. They always say the same thing. They want to talk. They want me to forgive them. They miss me. The words are always the same, and they come wrapped in guilt, coated in excuses, as if I should be the one to open the door they've closed. But I don't respond. I can't. I've learned that their apologies don't matter anymore, not when they were absent for so long, not when their absence shaped so much of who I've become. They want me to be part of their emotional cleanup crew. They want me to forgive them, to heal the wounds they created. But I'm not ready to pick up the pieces of their broken promises. I'm not ready to heal their guilt. That's not my job. I've spent years cleaning up the mess they left behind, learning how to navigate life without them. I've built myself back up from the rubble they left me in. I don't need them to tell me I'm okay. I've learned to be strong on my own. I fix things around the house now. I take care of the leaky sink, the broken shelves, the things my parents should have been there to do. I manage my bills, pay my rent, make sure I've got food in the fridge, and I make sure my life keeps moving forward whether they're part of it or not. The simple things, the mundane tasks that most people take for granted are my responsibilities now. They're mine to handle, and I handle them without hesitation. At first, I was scared of this responsibility, scared of not having anyone to turn to when something went wrong, but over time, I've learned that I am enough. I don't need them to guide me or to be my safety net. I've become my own safety net. I've found strength in the quiet, in the solitude, in the space they left for me to fill. And for the first time, I feel like I'm in control. The quiet that once terrified me has become my peace. It's strange how that works. The silence, which once echoed with the absence of my parents, is no longer a reminder of what I lost. It's a reminder of what I've gained: my independence, my strength, and my ability to stand on my own. I'm no longer waiting for someone who doesn't show up. I'm no longer sitting by the phone, hoping for a call that will never come. I've stopped hoping for the things I can't have. And in doing so, I've found a kind of peace I never thought was possible. I used to think that silence meant loneliness. I used to think that if I didn't have my parents, if I didn't have the love and support they were supposed to give me, I would always be alone. But I was wrong. The truth is, I'm not alone. I have myself. I have my own heart, my own mind. And I've learned to trust myself in ways I never did before. I'm not waiting for anyone to validate me, to tell me I'm worth loving. I know my worth. I've had to fight for it, but I know it now. And that's more than enough. When I see people posting pictures of their families on social media, it doesn't hurt anymore. I don't feel the ache in my chest like I used to. It's not jealousy. It's not bitterness. It's just the acceptance that my family isn't like theirs. And that's okay. I've stopped comparing myself to other people. I've stopped wishing for something that I can never have. Instead, I've created my own version of family. It's not perfect, but it's mine. It's my chosen family friends who understand me, who don't ask too many questions, who accept me for who I am, not who I was supposed to be. Sometimes I still think about them, about my parents, about the life I could have had. I wonder what would have happened if they had come back. I wonder what would have happened if they had just cared enough to show up, to be there for me when I needed them. But those thoughts don't haunt me like they used to. I've learned to put them aside, to let them go. I don't need them to make sense of my life anymore. I've found my own way to make sense of it. I've cut the ties for good. There's no bitterness in that decision, no anger. It's just the truth. They are who they are, and I am who I am. And I'm okay with that. I've made peace with the fact that they aren't coming back, that they may never truly understand what they've done. But I don't need their understanding. I don't need their forgiveness. I've already forgiven myself for the things I thought I needed from them. And that, I've realized, is the most important thing. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's mine. It's full of my own thoughts, my own voice, my own life. And in that silence, I've found something I never thought I'd have. Peace. I've learned that I don't need anyone to fill the spaces they left. I can fill them myself. In life, sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most difficult experiences. When we face abandonment, loss, or neglect, it can feel like we've been left behind, forgotten by those who should have cared for us. But in those moments, we discover a deeper strength within ourselves. We learn that we are capable of filling the emptiness, that we don't need to wait for others to fix us or validate our worth. The true power lies in self-acceptance and the ability to rebuild ourselves, even when the world seems silent or indifferent. Life does not always unfold as we expect, and we may face hardships that challenge our spirit. However, as we grow older, we come to understand that we are the ones who shape our peace. By letting go of the need for external validation, we find a quiet strength that comes from within. Forgiveness, not for others but for ourselves, frees us from the weight of the past. It is never too late to choose our path, to embrace the life we have, and make the most of the time we are given. In the end, peace comes not from others, but from accepting ourselves and finding meaning in our journey, no matter how difficult it may have been. Thank you for watching today's full story. We hope this journey resonated with you and reminded you that strength comes from within. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video here on Silent Wars. See you next time.